Mic check 1 2 1 2, and we back. We really don't know what happened. For some reason, the sound and everything froze, but it ain't gonna stop this. No, no, no. We back.
Is we live?
We live.
Yeah, I had to check YouTube real quick to make sure I could hear voices being talked. You know what? Never mind. When you say things out loud,
I wouldn't have said that out loud. You around here hearing voices? You want to see that?
You see?
I was trying to
and I'm
clean
glad
it
I
up.
missed it. All I heard him say was, I wouldn't have said
up.
that out loud, and I don't even want her to repeat it. Nope.
I thought the first one was bad. And then when I realized, okay, I'm going to clean it up with the second one, I was like, I can.
The bun and the gullets.
You know what? Mic check 1 2 1 2.
Oh, you here? Yeah. Welcome, Gabrielle.
Shut up.
You said shout out? Yeah, shout out to all y'all. I'm gonna go ahead and get the roll call again.
Roll
we got
call.
10 so far. Arthur Gray, Grand Rising again. Wild Indian Roots. Cato Kane, 7. Bonton South Dallas, Grand Rising. Liz Robinson, Grand Rising. Lachey, Grand Rising. Michael Brown Harris Cheek. And them, Peace, Grand Rising. P. Parker, Grand Rising. Now hit anybody in the chat as they show up. We about to get back started.
All right, let you two keep acting up. We'll go back to our home. We don't gotta be
here. We'll hit them with the. I don't have to take this.
I have to take this.
We do have our own platform that we stream on at the same time as this one, so let them keep playing. We'll cut this stream, bring everybody back to the website.
Well, everybody gotta turn them studio lights on.
All right, so whenever you're ready to continue, we can go ahead and continue. Knock this out the way.
Yeah.
Okay. To achieve long-term reform, Collier assembled a team in 1933 to draft reform legislation. What resulted was a 50-page proposed bill titled the Indian Reorganization Act, IRA. You know, every time I see that now, I wonder if it has everything to do with IRAs.
I wonder, right? Because, you know, even the WWF couldn't last for long, and now they're the WWE. So I wonder, you out here sharing names. Is that how we do it? Or you the same?
Because what we see is consistent is when one thing is implemented, other entities or other people or groups or whatever the case may be, they take a page. That's the playbook. They may make different changes, but the initial foundation of it is, you know, it is what it is.
One deals with banking, one IRA deals with banking. Yeah, they're two separate things. It's just they're abbreviated the same.
Oh, okay.
Okay. My bad. I apologize for jumping so far.
See what you made me do? Let me out this window with you. Let me get my leg back in here.
Well, you know, me and you have come to an understanding. This is why we need Bones. We can't be left alone.
Yeah, because we both be hanging out a window. Bones coming on. Like, what are y'all doing? It's like, man, you shouldn't have left the room. All right.
Yeah. How y'all get stuck in the window like that? How y'all hanging out the window like that and can't get down?
She got the upper torso. I got legs out the window.
Right.
I thought I was gonna land on my feet. I don't know what y'all do.
The window came down. My foot stuck. I can't get out. Don't go get help. Don't get help. Just help me. Help me.
Like, you're trying to go get help like you can't help. Wait a minute. I know you're going to get a camera. This ain't right.
Oh, that boy had bad. The draft bill proposed several changes to increase economic benefits to American Indians. The proposed legislation was composed of four basic parts or titles. I don't know why I thought of the four basic food groups, but okay. Title 1 would reorganize the tribal right of self government and seek economic development to foster tribal independence. Self government included the rights to establish their own governments, tax tribal members and businesses, and have their own court system. Title II would establish congressional support for Indian culture, including arts, crafts, skills, and traditions. It would authorize Congress to fund Indian arts and crafts and provide funding for Indian education. Title III would end allotment of Indian lands, transfer allotments still in Indian ownership back to tribal communal control, restore lands depleted by erosion, and purchase lands for tribes that lack a sufficient land base for economic self-sufficiency. Title 4 would create a national Indian court system, a court of Indian affairs, to hear the cases involving the self-governing Indian communities formed under the IRA. You know, this sounds good in words on paper, but man, okay. To gain support for his bill, Collier traveled throughout the West in March and April of 1934, holding a series of meetings with tribes. A recently released report served to support Collier's push for reform. In 1934, the National Resources Board, established by the New Deal's 1933 National Industrial Recovery Act, found in one of its many resource planning studies that for 16 reservations, 70% of the lands allotted to Indians and still owned by them were leased to non-Indians.
Did you say 70%?
Yep.
Okay. So make sure you said 70, not 17.
Also, 23% of the lands lay idle, unused for any particular economic purpose. Natives themselves used only 7% of the allotted lands. Did I read that right?
Yes, you did.
Because I felt like there was, it seemed like it was like a rise, like, when a movie gets intense, but then it just falls off and you hit the ground like, oh, I wasn't expecting that.
Well, read the details. What they say, the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
They removed Indians southeast, moved them out west, and gave them allotted land. Okay, cool. But what's the sense in giving somebody land if they don't have the resources for irrigation to produce on this dry land? So now these individual Indians had to get loans to do irrigation. They couldn't afford to do it. You put people in an economic system that never been in it before. What you think is going to happen?
Right.
This was done by design.
Right. Not all Indians, however, were supportive of the proposed reforms. Tribes who had successfully worked the allotments they had received in previous years were fearful of Collier's proposals to combine scattered allotments back into communal tribal lands. The 5 tribes of Oklahoma, consisting of the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, had such concerns. The Navajo opposed the proposed soil erosion control measures that would lead to reduction in livestock. Their herds of sheep and goats were important for prestige within the tribe and critical for actual physical survival at times. What? Sheep and goats were already here? Oh my.
Yes, they were. Indians were herding sheep and goats. Our
Right.
ancestors never. That's another. Your goat herder, hey,
Mm,
always didn't mean it came from cross border who was herding goats, y'all.
right. Dang, I send you out as sheep amongst wolves. Okay. Um,
Bad.
yeah. Okay. Their herds of sheep and goats were important for prestige within the tribe and critical for actual physical survival at times. The sheep provided meat for food and wool for blankets. Other tribes opposed the representative form of governments proposed by Collier. The government formed modeled after the United States was foreign to Indian. Hold on. The government form modeled after the United States was foreign to Indian traditions of hereditary tribal leaders and making decisions by consensus. In contrast, many in U.S. society considered this traditional Indian form of political authority communistic. Really?
What is really communism? Everyone being equal and having the same thing. Don't believe what everybody
Right.
tell you.
No, no, no. I'm just tripping that's wow.
Mm-hmm.
Even more of a challenge to Collier was convincing non Indians of the reforms, particularly Congress. Hmm. Eventually, Congress found the proposed bill too radical. As a result, they dropped most of Title II and all of Title IV. In addition, the self-governing powers granted in Title I would be much more limited. The Secretary of Interior would retain close oversight over all tribal activities. Importantly, the ending of the land allotment policy remained and was included in the final bill. However, the Indians in Oklahoma who wanted to retain their individual ownership of allotments and lobbied against the bill were successful. As a result, they were excluded from the final bill. Alaskan natives who, because of their remoteness, had a different history of relations with the United States government that did not include treaties and reservations were also excluded from the act. Congress had reduced the resulting act to only 6 pages from the original 50 pages, which makes sense why when they talk about the Alaskan tribe, wow.
Because you got to remember, they bought Alaska from who? Russia. Them people were already there when they bought it. So if another nation had it and the U.S. bought it, you ain't finna come in and tell these people what to do and they've been there already.
Right.
Look at the time when they purchased Alaska.
Right. A key provision of the IRA required approval by Indian tribes of the act before they came under its general provision. As it turned out, dozens of tribes elected not to participate. They either distrusted the provisions of the law or the intent of Congress. Some 250 tribes, bands, rancherias, small reservations in California, and pueblos held elections to decide whether to adopt IRA constitutional governments. Of those, 174 tribes voted to accept the IRA conditions while 78 voted against it. However, of the 174 who accepted it, only 92 actually adopted the IRA constitutions. Those who voted against IRA provisions or failed to adopt IRA constitutions could not receive federal funds to purchase land for economic development. To address Indians in Oklahoma and Alaskan natives in 1936, Congress passed the Alaska Reorganization Act and the Oklahoma Indian Welfare Act. These two acts provided some IRA benefits to tribes located in those areas. Some tribes rejecting the IRA, including one of the nation's largest tribes, the Navajo, still adopted bylaws similar to the IRA constitutions to qualify for some benefits. The IRA constitutions adopted in compliance with the act reorganized the authority of the Secretary of Interior to override any tribal actions if he so choose. To many tribes, the IRA governments and constitutions would be an alien concept, not integrating well with reservation life. Given close federal control and conflicts with traditional tribal leaders, they could exercise little power through them. In a sense, the existence of IRA governments actually served in some cases to restrain development of independent tribal governments that may have been more effective in governing their own communities. Man. As a result, the IRA accomplished some things and failed to do others. The IRA did not stop any further allotment and extended federal trust, legal responsibility over both individual and tribal lands indefinitely. The IRA thus checked the continuing loss of American Indian lands through the allotment process. The IRA provided a major avenue for tribes to seek economic recovery, just as other New Deal programs financially helped the U.S. population in general. The IRA provided loan funds for tribal projects, assisted modestly in the efforts of some tribes to acquire new lands, and set the stage for a number of tribes to charter corporations and attempt business ventures. In California, numerous landless tribes acquired many reservations, rancherias, by federal purchase of property. The rancherias attracted hundreds of native families who desperately needed a place to live. The IRA also encouraged dozens of previously disorganized tribes to adopt written constitutions, bylaws, election procedures, and forms of modern government. The IRA contained disappointments as well. As amended by a Congress still interested in assimilation goals, the law did not provide for the court system envisioned by John Collier. By excluding the American Indians of Oklahoma and Alaska, the law missed dozens of tribal communities. Congress never adequately funded the IRA. Tribes could not really gain sufficient monies to effectively attain tribal economic recovery. Some tribes that developed constitutions under the IRA found that lawyers in the Department of the Interior had changed their constitutions, often weakening their self-governing authority. In spite of these problems, as well as efforts in 1939 and 1943 to abolish the IRA by the Senate Indian Affairs Committee, the law remained in effect for those tribes that chose to organize and operate under it. Collier and his staff in general used the act to pursue their dream of increased tribal economic and political independence. Despite its shortcomings, the IRA brought the greatest change to U.S. Indian policy since the 1887 General Allotment Act. However, the act contained far less change than Collier had sought. Collier had faced a hesitant Congress and opposition by a number of tribes. Still, the IRA gave its name reorganization to this era of U.S. Indian policy that lasted from 1933 to 1950. The law, in spite of the controversies surrounding it, pushed policy and programs in new directions, driven by New Deal idealism of social and economic reform. The IRA became the centerpiece in what was labeled the Indian New Deal.
They created a mechanism, but purposely didn't finance it. So
right.
What do you think was going to happen?
Right.
And
they gave an option with no help. Right.
Like we said with the Reorganization Act, it allowed certain tribes to stay intact if they adopted the IRA's constitution. Basically, let the government run the tribe.
Yeah. Johnson O'Malley Act of 1934. Education problems were confronting the United States in general during the Great Depression. Just as school funding was severely dropping due to the economic crisis, the demand for better education was rising with the growth of major industries and the U.S. assuming a stronger role in global leadership. Indian education had always been a problem on reservations given their remoteness and lack of adequate funding. Indians who enrolled in public schools often faced racial discrimination and were discouraged from attending. By 1930, 53% of Indian children were enrolled in public schools. The New Dealers decided to tackle the Indian education issue. Given the financial conditions of the Great Depression, Congress concluded that for some parts of the country, it was no longer feasible to operate separate health and educational facilities for American Indians living outside reservations. To do so was, in effect, and economical. In response, Congress passed the Johnson-O'Malley Act, JOM, in 1934. The law was named for Hiram W. Johnson, chairman of the Senate's Committee on Indian Affairs, and Thomas P. O'Malley, chairman of the House Committee on Indian Affairs. The goal of the act was to improve education, medical attention, agriculture assistance, relief of distress, and the social welfare of American Indians. Despite the range of social welfare issues addressed by JOM, most of its funding and programs. Hold on, I got some jumping going on. Most of its funding and programs were concerned with education. Though the legislation was largely designed to help Indians not living on reservations, Though the legislation was largely designed to help Indians not living on reservations, Collier's Office of Indian Affairs applied it to reservation communities as well. Whoa.
Welfare.
Right. In hundreds of communities where American Indian children were enrolled in public schools, the federal government would pay public schools for expenses needed to educate Indian children in their districts. The law was amended in 1936 to make it easier for the states and federal government to cooperate to meet the Act's objectives of educating Indian children. The amendment allowed federal contracts to go to parties other than the state. JOM proved successful in making it possible for many Indian children to switch from federal schools to better equipped and staffed public schools. With the availability of increased funds, public school districts welcome Indian children into their schools. Indian arts and crafts. Prior to the 1930s, the federal government had offered little encouragement or support to the artistic talents, music, or dance of American Indians. In fact, most government educational programs were founded on the intent to destroy or alter native ways of life and assimilate American Indians into the surrounding majority culture. However, the New Dealers of the Roosevelt administration were bringing to the nation of multiculturalism perspective built into the economic recovery programs. Having failed to get support for Indian arts and crafts through the IRA, John Collier pressed Congress further. Finally, on August 27, 1935, Congress passed a law creating the Indian Arts and Craft Boards. This change was yet another program inspired largely by John Collier. More about Luther Standing Bear, a Native spokesman. Luther Standing Bear, 1868 to 1939, was born Otakite, a member of the Lakota people of the Sioux Nation. He grew up on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota and was one of the tribe's hereditary chiefs. As an outstanding student, he was taken from his family and tribe by the federal government and sent to Carl's Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. He later wrote vividly in his autobiography, Land of the Spotted Eagle, 1933, about his experience and his difficulties adjusting to existence in a government Indian school. He hated red flannel, shoes, and other things forced upon him. Following completion of his education, Standing Bear found employment as a teacher, minister, and clerk. In 1898, Buffalo Bill Cody hired him to work in his Wild West show. This employment led Standing Bear to California, where he became an American Indian actor in numerous early Hollywood films. He became a member of the Actors Guild of Hollywood and the Indian Actors Association. In 1920s and 1930s, Standing Bear fought to improve conditions for Indians on the reservations. He wrote several books about Indian life and government policy. He also was a member of the Oglala Council and the National League of Justice to the American Indians. Standing Bear's other books included My People, the Sioux, 1928, Stories of the Sioux, 1934, and My Indian Boyhood, 1988. He was a powerful, vivid writer. This law sought to encourage the production of traditional and contemporary arts and crafts by American Indians by expanding markets for...
Time out. Wait 1 minute. He wrote a book, his Indian childhood and cultural ways, but I thought he was kidnapped from his family as a child.
Yep, he was.
So never mind. Just a thought. Sorry about that.
Yeah, he was born in 1868. And so he was what, 30? So when he was 30, he was hired to work as the Wild Wild West show. So
that's what I'm saying. If he was kidnapped as a little child, how much do he know about Indian ways? And I'm not saying that to be funny or anything, because it states that he was taken and he was educated. They educated him on how they wanted him to be educated, correct?
Right. So his first book, it was about his difficulties adjusting to the existence in a government Indian school. So this was a boarding school he went to.
Yep. That he got kidnapped and put into.
Right.
Bush's boarding school.
So is it safe to say what he know about Indians is what outsiders taught him?
Yeah.
James said he made up stuff like Alex Haley.
Yeah, because he did not have a connection to his tribe. He was kidnapped as a child. So what could he tell you about cultural ways if he was raised completely outside of American Indian cultural practices? Just a thought. Them numbers ain't gonna fool me.
Mm-hmm. He was a vivid writer. So if he was a vivid writer, that means he was really good in descriptive words.
Because think about it. That's what they sent him to school for.
They taught him. Yeah.
But think about it. What were they doing? Converting Indians into Indian agents. Because what did they learn? The government learned we'll use their own people to convert them. And that's what they were doing. Kidnapping Indians, raising them how they wanted to raise them. Then you send them back around the Indians in high positions so they can influence the tribes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-mm.
This,
Mm-mm.
oh yeah, this law sought to encourage the production of traditional and contemporary arts and crafts by American Indians by expanding markets for their sale. To improve their marketability, standards for Indian crafts were adopted. The law provided for the trademarking of designs, open of a opening of a sales art gallery in the Department of the Interior in Washington, D.C., and the operations of Indian art museums at Browning, Montana, Rapid City, South Dakota, and Anadarko, Alabama. The construction and operation of these museums and collections of artifacts helped to preserve and encourage native arts. Other projects included the operation of Covelo Indian Market at the Golden Gate International Exposition World's Fair in San Francisco in 1939 and 1940.
Yeah, that's the world fairs where they had actors pretending to be like Indians living there.
Yeah,
It got so bad you even had a set of Indians that accepted money to live in the fair
yeah.
on expedition. Like, what is this?
Mm,
If I remember correctly, one of the world fairs, you had a whole tribe move to the
yeah,
world site and live there and got paid to live there to be on expedition. I'm like, come
yeah.
on, man. But it's no different than what it is today. It's just in this time we have digital media. They do the same thing. They control your images and your likenesses and basically program the rest of the world to view you in the light that they want you to view you.
Man, I'm gonna write this down, but I just had a yeah, um, yeah. I agree. Part of the New Deal Public Works program also focused on preserving Indian cultures. States, particularly New Mexico, designed such projects as part of their Works Progress Administration (WPA) program. Artists and musicians were hired to teach crafts and traditions almost lost. Wait.
So who was these artists and musicians that were hired to teach these traditions that were almost lost? But if they wasn't Indians living in the cultural way, what are they teaching you?
Right. In addition, as part of the field work with tribes, Office of Indian Affairs employees worked to inventory, photograph, and document traditional arts and crafts in the 1930s.
Yeah, we went over this. This is when the dude was going through recording all the different
Uh-huh.
languages of the Indians, taking
Yep.
pictures. A lot of these pictures that you see with Indians standing with guns and dressed in garb, that's from the 1930s and 40s, y'all.
Right.
A lot of that stuff was created.
Right.
It's created to make you think a particular way about Indians.
Special projects included an extensive photography project in 1941 and in 1942, and Alfred W. Whiting's report on the survey of Hopi crafts, 1941 to 1942. These assessments of native arts permitted the Indian Arts and Craft Board to address the misrepresentation of native art. Since often art and objects supposedly produced by American Indians were actually counterfeit. You know, okay.
Again, who is these so-called teachers of Indian arts and music? Because if they wasn't Indians, how can they be teaching you Indian art and music?
Right.
Just like Julia Stiles and Save the Last Dance actually becoming the instructor. Nah, yo. Nah. You gonna teach me how to dance.
Right.
Just got here.
He said, "You just got here. You teaching me." Darren's dance grooves.
That's like A2 teaching people Asian culture. Ain't name one of us Asian up here.
Right? He's like, yeah, we the professionals now. He's like, on today's episode of the Cab Grand Rising Show. What?
As the ages turn.
Oh man. No, we stay in your lane. Stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane.
Shout out to Tulane. you over here got 2 lanes on you. Shout out to Carrie Bay.
Though some economic benefits for Indians were seen from these programs, it was almost negligible when compared to the desperate economic conditions of many tribal communities at this time. However, from this support, a small group of Indian artisans was able to grow and influence students in future years.
But who was the teachers again of these Indian students? Were the teachers Indian? Did the teachers grow up in these cultural arts and practices and music?
Sound like a Harambe situation, man. What's going on? Harambe. Can't teach me that. It ain't even me.
You know, I'm really seeing how, or I wouldn't even say, okay, it might be how. I'm really seeing what assimilation is. So you take things that are tradition, you take things that are part of your culture, you take even down to jewelry and baskets and singing and dancing. You take these things that are part of your culture. This is part of your tradition. This is heritage. This isn't, and you take it and then you say, all right, we're gonna basically trick it out. We're gonna sell it.
It's even worse than that. And a lot of us experience this in our lifetime. It's being taught by someone who doesn't look like you, who doesn't share your background, your culture, or anything of your lifestyle. How is that possible? What are they really teaching
Right.
you? Teaching you their perception of what they think an Indian is? Because that's the best that they can do. Again, that's like me trying to teach everybody here how to speak Mandarin, but I don't speak Mandarin.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that going on now. People trying to tell you who you is just because they learned it that way or they're supposed to be teaching it that way. It's like, what? You don't know me.
And by knowing this, the one thing that it should show you is how much of this Indian so-called art and music and dance was created.
Ooh.
And back.
Yep.
Huh? How much of this stuff you see, the patterns and the colors and the dream catch, how much of that stuff was created and given to you?
So it's like being taught a perception of a stereotype of a perception of who you are.
Didn't they do it to us in school when they wanted us to be African Americans? Gave us Roots in school, a fictional movie in school like it was history. So we know they listen. We have witnessed this in our lifetimes, brothers and sisters. That's the question. How much of this Indian stuff is all fictional? Wondering why them dances don't got no rhythm to it. Because it's not real.
Establishing Indian law. Though the tribal court system did not survive in the congressionally passed version of the IRA, Collier believed Collier believed other avenues were open to increasing the protection of Indian rights. A part of the New Deal Public Works Program, government funded jobs, compiled historically government records and placed them safely at long last into national archives. A place where official records and documents, hold on, through the tribal court system, though the tribal court system did not survive in the congressionally passed version of the IRA, Collier believed other avenues were open to increasing the protections of Indian rights. A part of the New Deal Public Works Program, Public Works Program, government-funded jobs compiled historical. I'm sorry, something's going on with my computer. Compiled historical government records and placed them safely at long last into national archives, a place where official records and documents are kept. In similar moves, Secretary Ix had the Department of Interior collect information on past Indian policies, relevant executive orders, acts of Congress, and court decisions. So court decisions. So if I'm to understand this paragraph correct, is it saying that in archives before the dismantling of Indian courts, Indian policies, things that were put in place before the New Deal, those records, those court records that were established are in archives? Can y'all hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Mic check. 222.
Y'all went too long. I got nervous. I'm by myself.
I think I was waiting for Bones to say he can hear you, and then he didn't. And then I came in, and we both unmuted at the same time. I think we both did the same thing.
Got to rapping, and that's how it happened. Is that? Am I understanding that correct?
Oh, you got to ask the question again.
Okay, the question is, based off of this paragraph, am I to understand that because we had courts, tribes had their own court system. If I'm saying that correctly, they had their own judicial system. One of the things that was done away with was our judicial system, our court system. But those records, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's saying that those records are in archives.
Yeah. What do you think? Listen, how do you think they have a lot of our ancestors' information? Because our ancestors were collecting it already.
So going to archives for court decisions, see, that's another interesting aspect of looking up records, because man, hold the presses.
Don't worry, Saturday is tomorrow.
Okay, you know what? It is. It's a whole week. It's been 2 weeks. I don't understand. Okay, part of the New Deal for American Indians, therefore, was trying to sort out which laws and policies apply to them, and if the laws or policies should be changed for the benefit of the tribes. Felix Cohen, a solicitor, lawyer in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and Nathan Margold, a solicitor for the Secretary of Interior, carried out much of this work. The materials ultimately filled volumes of 3-ring binders. Cohen created a useful digest published as the Handbook of Federal Indian Law in 1941.
my biggest problem with all this is you're creating Indian laws without no Indians involved.
And I was just about to say that, yeah. Like, am I understanding? Am I catching this right? The whole pattern I'm seeing here is that all this is being constructed, instructed, created, expanded for the benefit of. And I could be wrong. Just correct me, Bones. But I don't hear any reference to influence by any Indians involved in any of these positions.
Correct. And the only ones you get there are the ones that they educated.
Correct. So would it be? See, all right. I gotta let me write this down real quick. I got a question. I mean, even that in itself is a form of and part of assimilation, right?
Yes. What was all this created for? What was the purpose of this being created?
For assimilation.
And we can never forget that.
So even and so would it be incorrect? No, would it be correct to take a type of understanding with this that even based off of the laws, policies, all this that was implemented, created, and established, it was not created, implemented, and established by Indians for Indians. It was created and established and implemented by people who were not Indian for Indians. So that's still a type of assimilation, right?
It's not even a
Or
type,
I'm off.
Gabrielle. It is. Again, what was the BIA created for? What was their main purpose?
I'm using the word type. Yeah. Assimilation.
That their main purpose was created to assimilate us. So every policy and
Right.
everything that came out of there was to do what? Assimilate us.
Assimilate.
Because if
So,
it was really to
okay, here's
help,
my
if
question.
it was
I'm
really
sorry.
to help, why? If it was really meant to help, why did they change the original Indian Reorganization Act that would have gave us everything that was taken from us? Remember, it
Right.
was 50 pages. They the ones who cut it down. Remember, the original one gave tribes full autonomy to judge themselves, create their own laws and industries. Remember, they took all that out.
So let me ask you something, because I'm thinking
Mm.
now, because the more I read through this, the more to me, and again, I could be wrong, I'm seeing it from the perspective that doing what we're doing, putting together what we're putting together, establishing what we're establishing, kind of puts us in a better position than what has been done and what is being done on reservations.
Correct, because all those were created by someone else for you. At a
Right.
autonomous assembly, we're just taking to the approach, let's create it for ourselves. So that way, the laws, the constitution, the bylaws, and everything are created by Indians to benefit Indians.
Okay.
That's the difference. That's what we mean that doing it for yourself. So that way, when you design it, it's actually designed to benefit you.
Right. And so
These
would it
programs through
be,
the BIA wasn't designed to benefit you. They were meant to strip you.
but when you set up and establish a program or an entity that is for the benefit of, oh,
Remember, you can do that. It's up to who
yeah,
built who funding the organization and what's their mission statement.
right,
You know what I'm saying? Like I say, autonomous assembly is designed like any other nonprofit. The
right,
difference is it was designed by American Indians for the American Indian, the urban Indian, the
right.
misidentified Indian. So by being designed that way in this constitution and bylaws is for the people, the company will always
Yeah,
benefit the people because that's how it's designed. Remember,
right,
design your constitution and bylaws. If you want to make a nonprofit that will always serve the community, just put it in the constitution. And that's
right.
what it'll be designed to do. Now your board, your CEO, and everyone, that's how they govern the company. that's the objectives for the company. I mean, you can't expect an outside company created by someone else to really benefit you, can you?
Right. No. Oh crap. Where am I at? I'm sorry. I went so far in thinking questions. Sorry. Where did
On
I
the
leave
next
off
part,
at?
your civilian conservation corps is next. The Indian Division.
Wait.
Yeah, you finished on what they did.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That they
Okay.
created.
My bad. I got
these two guys created laws. But is you an Indian?
I mean, there's no way around it. And it's just one of those things. The more I read, and not just today, but just in general, the more I read on the things that took place, the more I take a better understanding or a better knowing. Don't know everything, but a better knowing on both sides. It's one of those things to say, okay, you're not Indian, you're Indian, you're this. Like, either way, it's a problem. There have been problems and there have been sufferings and you know what I mean? There is a lot that has been done, and there is a lot that not can, yes, but needs to be fixed. And the more I read, the more I take an understanding of what was done and realizing that we got a lot of internal and external healing and coming together to do, because this is the result of it is what we're dealing with now.
But like you said, you don't know what you have to fix until you know what was broken and what went wrong.
Right. Yeah, because I'm genuinely thinking now, whole families living on one whole block, another whole family living on another whole block. You know, though, you call an area, you may call an area Picket Town, because all the Pickets live over here. You call this one area Soul Street. The street's not even named that, but all the souls live over there. You know what I mean? It's just okay. I'm reading. The Civilian Conservation Corps, Indian Division. On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt signed an executive order creating the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, one of his personal favorites among the New Deal programs. The CCC employed young males between 18 and 24 of age to perform conservation tasks. These included planting trees, fighting wildfires, building national park facilities, constructing wildlife shelters, digging irrigation ditches for farmers, constructing trails, and numerous other activities. One of the most successful New Deal programs, the CCC lasted until 1943 and employed 2.5 million workers who lived in camps across the country. That's 2.5 million Indians, right? Can you hear me? Okay. Through the efforts of John Collier, the Office of Indian Affairs established the Civilian Conservation Corps Indian Division, CCCID. This special branch of the CCC sponsored programs on reservations. Collier obtained $100 million from Congress for irrigation, soil erosion control, and road construction projects. Between 1933 and 1942, 15,000 American Indian young men served in the CCCID. CCCID serves three major purposes. It provided training in useful skills, created a payroll for unemployed young men, and restored land affected by excessive soil erosion due to overgrazing. As required through the CCC program, those enlisted in the service personally kept about $5 per month for spending money and sent the other $20 in income home to their families. Oh my goodness.
You ready for some more? Real quick?
We watched, yeah, okay. I got a couple of questions real quick.
Let me fill this in real quick for you to tie it up. Remember, this is April 5th, 1933, and they're hiring these people to do irrigation and soil erosion. Do you know why? Because 1930 was the Dust Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
They use Indians to fix what they messed up with trying to farm out west and ruining the soil. Remember, this is April 5th, 1933. Dust Bowl is 1930.
Got you. Now, first paragraph in this part, it says, one of the most successful New Deal programs, the CCC, lasted until 1943 and employed 2.5 million workers who lived in camps across the country. Now, my question was that 2.5 million Indians? However, on the next paragraph, it said that between 1933 and 1942, 15,000 American Indian young men served in the CCID. Now, the 15,000 American Indian young men that served in the CCID, were they part of the 2.5 million workers that lived in camps across the country that trained them and taught others who did not understand the land, who did not understand the farming, on how to?
Look at it this way. Let me give a rundown. Work camps. Federal government decided to create work camps for unemployed single men. Work camps usually located deep in the woods, so the men were completely isolated. Men worked on projects, building roads, clearing land, and digging drainage ditches. Paid 20 cents a day and given room and board. Just a brief on what was going on. Yeah, it was the work camps after the Great Depression. Remember, you had the Great Depression, you had the Dust Bowl. All this stuff is going on at the same time.
Right.
So while they're doing these work camps to get these single people back to work, to try to get everything moving, at the same time, they're bringing in Indians who they just made taxable citizens, who they're just giving employment. Federal government pumped up off of us. Yeah, the key to remember, this is all during the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, the Dust Bowl lasted from 1930 to 1936.
Mm-hmm.
This is 1933 when they're sending them out there to start building irrigation systems and ditches to stop the erosion of the soil. Wasn't this plan for soil erosion $100 million to reverse it?
Yep. $100 million to reverse it, and they got paid $25 a day. Oh, $25 a month?
$25 a month, 20-some cents a day.
Federally funded projects by CCCID designed to combat erosion included new system for livestock grazing. Other projects on reservations included reforestation, spring and reservoir improvements, road and trail systems, fences, water systems, laying telephone lines, and construction of tribal facilities. In addition to restoration of land still in tribal ownership, Collier also obtained 1 million acres of marginal farmlands through the New Deal's Resettlement Administration and Farm Security Administration to add to tribal
FSA,
base. Huh?
FSA,
Uh-huh.
FSA.
Yep. Erosion control projects by the CCID also applied to these new lands as well for new tribal facilities. The Office of Indian Affairs adopted a standard plan for tribal community buildings and clinics. CCID constructed a number of these buildings to meet tribal needs on Indian lands across the country. The CCID program provided much needed employment on reservations. However, little progress was actually made in making Indian farmers more economically competitive on the open market. Farmers still lacked capital to buy the necessary equipment. Dang it. Okay.
Ain't this sound familiar?
Uh huh. End of the Indian New Deal. The various reform programs, collectively known as the Indian New Deal, were almost solely the result of efforts by Commissioner of Indian Affairs John Collier and Secretary of Interior Harold Hicks. President Roosevelt was largely uninformed about American Indian issues. The biggest successes came in stopping the loss of tribal lands through the 1934 IRA, which Collier had spent much of the 1933 drafting, and passage of the Johnson-O'Malley Act, providing funds to support Indian educational, social welfare, and medical needs. Also during his first year, Collier saw passage of the Pueblo Relief Act. This act increased monetary awards of Pueblo Indians of New Mexico who had lost land and water through the Pueblo Land Act of 1924. Collier, in his zeal for reform, pressed on with reforms dropped by Congress from the IRA bill before it was passed. This led to repeated battles between Collier and Congress over budget. Opposition over Indian New Deal programs also came from some Indians. Tribes in Oklahoma favored assimilation into white society and did not want to adopt the multiculturalism policies of Collier. Also, the Navajos of Arizona.
Now I'm saying pause right there. That's a very important line. Can you just read it one more time?
Tribes in Oklahoma favored assimilation into white society and did not want to adopt the multiculturalism policies of Collier.
Letting you know that there were some tribes that wanted to assimilate into American culture. Not Indians, some whole tribes that wanted to assimilate.
Yep. Also, the Navajos of Arizona and New Mexico fought efforts by Collier to cut back the size of their sheep herds as part of the program to stop soil erosion. The sheep were vital to the Navajo way of life. After several years of battle between Collier and Congress to fund Indian New Deal programs, the budget demands of World War II, 1939 to 1945, finally brought monetary support of the programs to an end. Really? Give me a second. The rest of my page is blank.
Sorry about that. Don't know if you asked a question. Someone just called.
No. I was saying, give me a second. The rest of my page is blank. It's still thinking. I don't know why. close some windows. Not helping. Oh, let me try to do it on. Just thought about it. I heard double cousin's
And that
voice
goes
saying
back to what we said
right?
before, that we know that there were outside parties that had their hands in this. But we cannot forget or erase the fact that there were whole tribes that wanted to assimilate into white society.
Right.
That's what they chose. Now, what happens when you come to find out you come from one of these tribes that wanted to assimilate into white society?
Now you know the truth.
And that's what I was saying before, why genealogy is important. So you know where you come from. So you know the responsibilities that you have to face. Because a lot of tribes did this to themselves or did it to other tribes. That is the fact.
Right.
We don't have to like it, but it is what it is. The truth.
Right.
I mean, don't you have these same tribes telling a lot of our melanated brothers and sisters, no, you can't come here?
Yep.
Things that make you go,
And I'm hold on. Okay. Contributing forces, U.S. Indian policy. By 1870, military defeats and treaties had forced most surviving American Indians onto reservations set aside in remote areas of the West. U.S. society considered the American Indian a vanishing race. Almost every aspect of Indian life on a reservation was controlled or directly influenced by the U.S. Office of Indian Affairs. It had long been legally established that formal relationships with American Indian tribes were the responsibility of the federal government, not state or local governments. The agency regulated how tribal land and individual allotments owned by Indians could be used, and it provided health care and education for Indians. Indian agents had great power over Indians with little, if any, participation by Indians in their lives and property. Indians did not have the status of U.S. citizens, but rather were members of domestic dependent nations. Public interest over Indian issues began growing late in the 19th century following the Civil War, 1861 through 1865. Frustrations grew over forcing social change to help the freed slave in the South. Frustrations grew over forcing social change to help the freed slaves in the South. Northern social reformers were meeting ongoing Southern resistance. As a result, by the late 1870s, the attention of some social reformers shifted to the plight of American Indians.
Because they were the same people.
By the 1880s, reformers decided it would be in the best interest of Indians if they were forced into mainstream American society. Their goal was to create an educated and economically self-sufficient Indian population. They believed the best way to do that would be to make them property owning farmers. The desires of the reforms were much the same as land. Speculators and settlers who increasingly wanted access to lands and resources located within the reservations. Through their combined efforts, Congress passed the General Allotment Act of 1887, also known as the Dawes Act. Through this legislation,
You see what the Dawes Act was really created for now?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Through this legislation of the United States adopted a policy of eliminating native traditions, Christianizing Indians, and making them into farmers and landowners to help with the assimilation process. Yo, that is straight.
How our brother James said, we're getting to where the rubber meets the road now.
Yeah. Let me read that again because that was crucial. Through this legislation, the United States adopted a policy of eliminating native traditions, Christianizing Indians, and making them into farmers and landowners to help with the assimilation process. The act launched a national program to divide up tribal lands into individual farms. Under this new policy, the Office of Indian Affairs was charged with this division of the lands, education, and the training of farming skills as its main activities.
But think about that line you just read. They took certain Indians and made them like top farmers, like plantation owners
Yep.
who had other
Yep.
Indians to work for them to assimilate these Indians, assimilate them by calling them African Americans and slaves and other titles.
Correct.
Use Indians to convert Indians. That's the best way.
The General Allotment Act divided reservation lands into small parcels that would be assigned to individual tribal members. The federal government would hold the parcels for a period of 25 years, and then the ownership title would be transferred to the Indian allottee. The new individual owner would then begin paying taxes on it. Allotments at Makah Reservation, a heavily timbered property on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington, where were 10 acres. That was about all a man could clear in a lifetime of work with axe and saw. Many allotments in more open farming country were 80 acres. Grazing allotments in the dry open rangelands were 160 acres or sometimes larger. However, these parcels were often unsuitable for farming and Indians lacked agricultural tools. With the increased need for agricultural products during World War I, 1914 through 1918, the Office of Indian Affairs decided to speed up the process of giving full ownership of allotted lands to Indians so that they could sell or lease the land for farming. To do this, the agency introduced competency tests. Competency commissions would travel from reservation to reservation, supposedly to determine if individual Indians were capable of being productive landowners. The definition of competence was left somewhat vague at times. When an American Indian was deemed competent, he or she, 1, gained citizenship in the United States, and 2, received a deed for the land, and 3, had to begin paying taxes on their new land. However, in the zeal to wrest lands away from Indians, the commission would often not even take the time to meet with particular individuals they were assessing they were to assess, but declared them competent nonetheless. The Indians would have little knowledge of the asset. Oh my goodness, this is how people
And
lost
that's how
their
you took the
property on
land. Now
taxes.
you're reading the mechanism. You're reading the mechanism on how they took ancestral land because they deemed them competent with never meeting them. So now your ancestors don't even know they have an allotment. And by the time they do know they owe so much in taxes, now it belongs to the state or federal government.
Right.
Told you, get into where the rubber meets the road. Skirt, skirt.
However, soon, a non-Indian, often a land speculator, would approach the new Indian landowner to purchase their property for some amount, usually well below the market value. The Indian, having no means to pay taxes, had little choice but to get what money he could out of it. The General Allotment Act thus began an effective device for reducing the native land base and increasing local tax revenue. The nightmare of mixed ownership of lands on reservations. Oh my goodness. This is why you have to do a title search.
Yeah, because in the reservation, what started happening, you had non-Indians owning allotted lands on reservations.
And that would actually show a break in title. Okay, I'm sorry.
Now, how many of these non-Indians, just finna add a layer onto you real quick. Now, how many of these non-Indians enrolled as Indians later on after they had this allotted Indian land that they bought from an Indian? Now, how many of these non-Indians purchased land, then paid the money to be added to the Dawes Rolls as Indians? Now, what did they just gain? Uh-oh. So now let's say one of these non-Indians end up getting like 75% of this reservation land. Uh-oh. Now somehow he pays the money to get him and his family on this Indian roll list. Uh-oh.
A nightmare of mixed ownership of lands on reservations resulted from the allotment process. It created an even bigger nightmare of bookkeeping for okay, it just says for. I don't know what happened. More about Bureau of Indian Affairs. In 1786, the Secretary of War was placed in charge of Indian affairs in the newly formed United States. What? Since contact with tribes was predominantly through private and government trading houses, in 1806 a superintendent of trade was created to regulate trade with Indians. In 1834, Congress expanded the federal government's role in Indian matters with the creation of the Office of Indian Affairs in the War Department. In 1849, oversight of Indian affairs passed from military to civilian control as the Office of Indian Affairs was transferred from the Department of War to the newly created Department of Interior. A commissioner of Indian Affairs headed the Indian Agency and reported to the Secretary of Interior. Under the commissioner, several superintendents administered over Indian agents who were assigned to particular tribes. The agents were responsible for distributing annual payments to tribes promised through treaties, regulating trade between Indians and non-Indians, supervising educational programs, and supporting missionary work. The agents operated fairly independently. Inefficiency and corruption came with the lack of oversight. From the 1850s into the 1870s, a major focus of the agency was establishing a system of reservations to move Indians out of the way of westward expanding U.S. settlement. Following passage of the General Allotment Act in 1887, agents became increasingly responsible for making Indians into self-supporting farmers and abolishing Indian society. The
Hold on
agents
real
had
quick before you go deeper. Uh, did anyone notice that the Secretary of War was in charge of Indian
Oh, I was
affairs?
going to, yes, I was going to wait to this
Why do
because
you
I'm
think
about to
that was?
say they was at war. This is a war tactic. I'm
Because
reading this.
Indians are POWs, prisoners of war.
Correct.
That's why it's under the Secretary of War. If I hit on that rubber burning on that road, y'all.
Mm-hmm. Following passage of the General Allotment Act in 1887, agents became increasingly responsible for making Indians into self supporting farmers and abolishing Indian society. The agents had control over food distribution, farming tools, and military troops, thus holding a strong hand over Indian communities. Because education was such a strong part of the agency mission, by the 1900s, over half of the 4,260 employees of the Office of Indian Affairs were teachers or school employees. The agency grew from less than 3,000 employees in 1890 to 6,000 in 1918. By 1909, the agency was reorganized and superintendents and Indian agents were eliminated. In their place were school teachers to carry out U.S.
Hold on.
policies.
Now, you can't speed through that. That's very important. That the superintendents and Indian agents were eliminated and replaced with school teachers.
Yeah, they were
One
no
more
longer
time.
needed.
You just rushed.
Superintendents and Indian agents were eliminated and replaced with school teachers. The school
Mueller.
teachers were responsible of assimilating Indian children.
Correct. In their place were school teachers to carry out U.S. policies of assimilation. Through the early 1920s, a major role of teachers was to discourage the speaking of native languages and following traditional customs such as dress and dancing. This repression of
Still there, Gabrielle? And I continue. This repression of native culture lessened with release of memorandum report in 1928, which strongly criticized the agency's cultural assimilation policies. The report was filled with recommendations on improving the agency's education and healthcare programs. Under President Herbert Hoover, served 1929 to 1933, the agency began adopting some of the recommendations. Goes on further, during the Great Depression, under the leadership of John Collier, the Office of Indian Affairs grew in size to 12,000 employees. In 1934, the budget also expanded briefly to 52 million from 23 million in 1933 at the worst of the Depression. However, the budget was trimmed back to around 12 million a year from 1935 to 1942 before being slashed to less than 1 million during the war years. From 1909 to 1949, the agency's organization remained much of the same with a Washington, D.C. office and some 80 offices primarily located on reservations. By 1950, the Office of Indian Affairs became known as the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, and the modern structure of the BIA came into being with a system of 12 regional offices administrating 90 field offices. The responsibility of the agency included programs in health, education, welfare, law enforcement, forestry, job training, and irrigation. In 1955, healthcare was transferred out of the BIA to the newly created Indian Health Services, IHS. During the 1960s era, the Great Society programs of President Lyndon Johnson served 1963 to 1969, provided assistance to Indians outside of the BIA programs. Assistance provided directly to tribes included housing, anti-poverty programs. It was during this period that the first Indian was appointed head of the BIA. President Johnson appointed Robert Bennett in 1966. Also, the percentage of BIA Indian employees grew from 34% in 1934 to 78% by 1980. In 1977, under President Jimmy Carter, served 1977 to 1981, the position of the head of the BIA was elevated to the Assistant Secretary of the Interior Department, and the annual budget was $1 billion. Promoting tribal self-determination, along with programs in education, economic development, and natural resources. Management remained the primary mission of the agency at the beginning of the 21st century. Tracing the heirs, it goes on tracing the heirs to allotments. The end result was the allotment program dramatically increased the loss of lands held by tribes and individual American Indians.
Can y'all hear me?
Also,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I don't know how long.
No problem.
I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Were you reading? I'm sorry, because I had a question.
Yeah, I was in the process of reading, but I just started. You can go ahead and ask.
Wait. What were you reading? Because I was reading about Robert Bennett.
I'm on tracing the heirs to the allotment.
Huh?
Yeah, Robert Bennett worked, if I remember correctly, Robert Bennett worked with Martin Luther King, if I can remember correctly.
Okay, so wait.
It was one of the Indians, it was one of them that was in the staff with him. It's either Bennett or I can't remember the other fellow's name off the top of my head.
Okay, so did you hear me when I read President Johnson appointed Robert Bennett in 1966?
No, I ended up reading all that. Yeah, you went out.
Okay, I got a question then.
Yeah, but I read the part. Go ahead.
Question. All right. It says, okay, Robert Bennett was appointed in 1966. He was the first Indian appointed over the BIA, right? And then it said that employees grew from 34% to 78% from 1934 to 1980. Now, the BIA
employees, but this is the catch. This is the catch, Gabrielle. This is why you got to put it all in context. This is 1977.
Correct.
The reason why the numbers start jumping, because by 1970, you can self-identify as an American Indian.
Okay, so here's my question. Would it be correct in my thinking that, okay, the BIA was established for assimilation. By the time you appoint an Indian to be the head of the BIA and you increase your employees, your Indian employees, they've already
been assimilated.
Right.
Yeah, correct. Because remember again, 1970 was the first time you can self-identify on the U.S. Census.
Right.
So how many people in 1970 self-identified as Indians, but don't tie back to Indians?
So now you have assimilated Indians running an assimilated system for assimilation. I know it sounds crazy, but
correct. Because why would you have cultural Indians running an assimilation program? That wouldn't work.
That's like when the Portuguese had to be born. Man, hold on.
That's when the Africans that they chose you that came over here had to be born in Portuguese or Spain and Christians before they came here. So technically, them folks those were Portuguese.
Oh my goodness! Yes, because you can't take someone there until they're assimilated. You can't take them there.
Then they came over here. Yeah, they ain't bring no Africans straight out no woods over here. They need to stop.
Okay, where was I reading? I mean, where were you reading? I'm sorry, because I really didn't know. I was reading on my own. I was getting it.
Yeah, I'm on tracing the heir to the allotment, the second paragraph.
Wait. Oh, so you said
Tracing the heirs to the allotments, the end result was the allotment program dramatically increased the loss of lands.
okay. Held by tribes and individual American Indians, also fragmenting their reservation lands would strongly hinder wise and economic land use. The loss of lands occurred in two ways. First, unallotted reservation lands were sometimes identified as excess or unneeded and were sold to Euro Americans. Secondly, lands transferred out of federal control to Indian ownership were usually lost. Hmm. Often within 4 years, because the new owners could not afford to pay taxes to the counties where they were located. This loss further reduced the natives' land base. When the act began in 1887, the tribes owned approximately 138 million acres. When the law was suspended in 1934, the total native land base had dropped to less than 48 million acres. Hmm. The allotment program promoted by the General Allotment Act was a major assault on tribalism. American Indian society is largely communal, in direct opposition to the concept of owning small individual farms. A further decline in farms. All right. A further decline in the Indian condition. Under the policies of forced cultural assimilation prior to 1933, the physical and economic condition of American Indians further declined. Sanitation on remote reservations was very poor and employment was largely non existent. Infectious disease such as tuberculosis and eye disease were much more common in Indian communities than in the general U.S. population. They also suffered high rates of infant mortality. Many Indians had to sell their land and live without any means of financial support. Despite the efforts of the federal government to make farmers out of Indians, the number of Indian farmers actually declined from the 1900s to the 1930s, as did the amount of land farmed. Indian farmers were unable to compete in the growing agriculture industry, which increasingly involved expensive mechanization. The demand for cash to buy machinery was more than they could raise. When natural resources of value were discovered on Indian lands, usually the Indians would see little financial benefit. Private business and corrupt Indian agents would conspire to shortchange royalties owed to the Indian or tribal landowners. For example, oil discoveries on Indian lands, particularly in Oklahoma in the early 20th century, commonly led to swindles. Much trickery occurred in taking lands away from Indian control. In addition to economic and health issues, many Indian culture traditions were lost during this period. During the 1910s, the Office of Indian Affairs began an aggressive campaign to stop the practice of Indian ceremonies. The ceremonies, such as the Hopi snake dance, were labeled obscene, superstitious, and immoral by the federal agencies.
This is when they putting the perversion on our culture, perverting our culture.
Now, I'm really confused because a lot of not just this, but what we've read so far, even from the beginning of this link, isn't it a contradiction? Oh, well, no, because right now we're in the 70s, right? Oh no, this is 1910. No, it still doesn't matter. This is after 1776.
Mm-hmm.
But wait. It wasn't until 1924 that all Indians became U.S. citizens.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until 1994. Oh. I mean, 1924. Okay. And immoral by the federal. Okay. There was little appreciation of the ceremony's religious value. Not only did the dances have religious worth, but they were becoming valuable from a tourism standpoint in the Southwest at pueblos. However, termination of the Indian dances became a focal point of those promoting assimilation as they were considered unchristian traditions. The role of the Indian agent was to dissolve Indian culture as quickly as possible.
One more time for the nosebleed.
The role of the Indian agent was to dissolve Indian culture as quickly as possible. You know what? Let me just say this. And this is where my mind is at right now. People need to be very careful calling somebody an agent.
Well, let's break down what is the agent. The agent is the person that's trying to get the Indian no longer to be Indian.
Right.
Oh, you don't need genealogy.
Genealogy ain't important. You don't need to participate.
That's an Indian agent because he's taking you away from something that's bringing you to who you are.
Yeah. Other measures were also taken to assimilate Indians. During this time, Indian children were taken from their families and sent to boarding schools away from their communities. There, they were prohibited from speaking Indian language. The legal status of Indians living in the United States was still largely unresolved as well. Several thousand American Indians served in World War I in the military forces. Several thousand American Indians served in World War I in the military forces in the United States, side by side with other Americans. However, almost 1/3 of Indians who entered military service were still not considered citizens of the United States. Native peoples remained in ambiguous legal status in the country where they were born and lived. Congress belatedly passed the Indian Citizen Act of 1924 to correct the situation. Though Indians could still not vote in state elections, passage of this law raised national attention about American Indians. The Pueblo lands issue. Another issue would also serve to raise public awareness of the Indian condition. A U.S. Supreme Court decision in 1913 suddenly called into question the land ownership of whites living in areas claimed by the Pueblo Indians in New Mexico. This issue gained national attention in 1922 when Senator Holm Bursam of New Mexico introduced the Bursam Bill. The proposed legislation would have forced the Pueblo Indians to document ownership of their lands to defend them against their loss. No. My check. Can you hear me?
Loud and clearly.
I just got to make sure this thing doesn't log me out because I'm reading through the phone.
No problem.
Against their loss. Okay. This requirement was virtually impossible for Indians to comply with. The records of Pueblo lands dated far back through the territorial Mexican and Spanish administration in Rio Grande Valley. Many of the records simply did not exist. What? Wait, many of the records simply did not exist. Well, that is a period. Okay. Others were often written in Spanish and kept in archives and libraries in Europe. They were well out of reach of Pueblo. Owned by Pueblos in New Mexico would be given to the white settlers who were considered illegal squatters by the Indian communities. Wait, did I read that right? In essence, the bill would guarantee lands owned by Pueblos in New Mexico would be given to the white settlers who were considered illegal squatters by the Indian communities. What? The proposed bill received much criticism in the press, and John Collier did. Oh, I knew. Did much to increase public awareness of what he considered an unjust loss of land by the Indians. The Bursum Bill caused hundreds of friends of the American Indian to rally and oppose its passage. Leaders in this effort include John Collier, author and activist for the preservation of Indian culture, Mary Austin, and the American Federation of Women's Club. As a result of their efforts, Congress passed the Pueblo Lands Act in 1924. That was much more favorable to the concerns of the Pueblos than originally expressed in the Bursum Bill. By the early 1920s, the public began to recognize that the Office of Indian Affairs was doing a very poor job in managing tribally owned forests and mineral rights. John Collier, at the time a New York social worker, in particular, began to speak out publicly against government policies of mismanagement and assimilation. He was hired by the American Federation of Women's Club to present his views. Collier contended American Indian traditions should be respected, not abolished. Collier also founded the American Indian Defense Association, an activist Indian rights organization. Through the organization, Collier pressed for Indian reform to better protect the interests of Indians. Collier's campaign worked, and increasing public critics of federal Indian policies led to the end of the suppression of Indian ceremonies and other traditions by 1925. Investigations of U.S. Sorry, I touched my phone and
Problem.
it jumped somewhere.
It jumped because I touched my phone.
It did.
Bringing it back, the American Federation of Women's Clubs. The General Federation of Women's Clubs, founded in 1890 during the Progressive Movement, is a federation of over 3,000 women's clubs in the United States which promote civic improvements through volunteer services. Founded by Jane Cunningham Carroll. I wonder what was their purpose.
I'm really trying to find my spot again on this phone. I do apologize. Okay. They were all out of the reach and existing bill. Okay. Did I read, am I at the proposed bill received much criticism in the press? That's where I'm at? Yeah. Okay. Okay, the proposed bill received much criticism in the press, and John Collier did much to increase public awareness of what he considered an unjust loss of land by the Indians. The Bursum Bill caused hundreds of friends of the American Indian to rally and oppose its passage. Leaders in this effort included John Collier, author and activist for the preservation of Indian culture, Mary Austin, and the American Federation of the Women's Club. As a result of their efforts, Congress passed the Pueblo Lands Act in 1924. That was much more favorable to the concerns of the Pueblos than originally expressed in the Bursum Bill. By the early 1920s, the public began to recognize that the Office of Indian Affairs was doing a very poor job in managing tribally owned forests and mineral rights. John Collier, at the time a New York social worker, in particular began to speak out publicly against government policy and mismanagement and assimilation. He was hired by the American Federation of Women's Club to present his views. Collier contended American Indian traditions should be respected, not abolished. Collier also founded the American Indian Defense Association, an activist Indian rights organization. Through the organization, Collier pressed for Indian reform to better protect the interests of Indians. Collier's campaign worked, and increasing public criticism of federal Indian policies led to the end of the suppression of Indian ceremonies and other traditions by 1925. Investigations of U.S. Indian policy also began to mount. Indian education through the 1920s. Since the late 19th century, the federal government had assumed the lead role in Indian education. Earlier, Congress had provided funds to religious missionaries to help civilize the native population. Man, look. I really don't like the word civilized. It's starting to look completely different. Y'all can still hear me? Wait, let me make sure I'm still in Zoom. Okay. Go back to reading. I just need to make sure Zoom doesn't log me out. Okay. Okay. Give me a minute. Okay. Earlier, Congress had provided funds to religious missionaries to help civilize the native population. However, following the Civil War, it became apparent the government needed to assume a more active role. More Indians had become isolated on reservations, and many were not being reached by religious organizations. Indian children needed more preparation for assimilating into white society than they were receiving from scattered and inconsistent religious programs. Shout out to you, Bones. Shout out to A2. Yeah, like Dudu say, this is where the rubber meets the road. Give me a second, dog. Pots and pans monsters, they howling. Okay, my bad. They stopped. I hope. Okay. By 1880, the number of federally operated day schools and reservations boarding schools began growing. In 1879, an Indian school for teaching vocational trades opened in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Girls were taught homemaking skills while boys were taught blacksmithing, carpentry, and other industrial skills. Education consisted of 4 types of schools by 1900s. These were on reservation and off-reservation boarding schools, local day schools for Indians, and local public schools. In 1900, some 153 federal Indian schools of various types were in operation, including new boarding schools at Santa Fe and Phoenix. Because of the lack of acceptance of Indian children in many public schools, the Office of Indian Affairs shifted in the 1920s to more exclusively Indian schools. The Office of Indian Affairs launched a campaign to organize the growing number of schools into an integrated system modeled after the public school system. A three-level system was established consisting of day schools for the beginning students, reservation boarding schools for intermediate instruction, and off reservation vocational schools for the best students. Some schools also adopted an outing program in which pupils were hired out to local white families and businesses. This
What?
program gave, yeah,
Yeah, I said what to highlight that because it's showing you what this
hmm
is to. If you follow the breadcrumbs, you can see what this is setting up.
yeah. This program gave students a chance to earn money and experience the non Indian world. This system persisted into the 1930s. Conservative white administrators and instructors dominated all schools through the early 20th century. A key goal, excuse me, a key goal throughout the system was to destroy Indian culture in the pupils and prepare them for assimilation into white society. In the boarding schools, Indian youth were separated from family and friends, fed food strange to them, and forced to speak English. Punishment was often harsh. Through the 1910s, a number of problems began adding up. Indian graduates were not finding many jobs in white society and were turning to reservations with little job opportunity. School buildings were falling into despair. Overcrowding was causing major health problems. As always, parents did not like their children being removed from the home and the community, sometimes forcefully. Hold on, give me a second.
This information and all other information that we've covered will be on the website, autonomousassembly.com.
But y'all know what's funny about this? This happens to go hand in hand with something too. When you read the history on so-called black public education in the South, it's what from 1861 to 1920. It's kind of funny that these policies go hand in hand.
I'm gonna do a mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check.
Two, 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 two.
Two, two, two. We'll do a roll call from 10:52 a.m. That's what I got. My bad. I don't know what happened. Lachey, Grand
I
Man Staff Amendment.
apologize.
Who was that?
My daughter just walked in. My bad.
You got
Threw me
problem.
off.
But I'm doing a roll call.
Okay, my bad. Apologize.
Mhm. Peace, Lachey, Bonton,
Really?
South Dallas.
Hmm.
P. Parker, Grand Afternoon. Doodoo Vision 2, Peace, Greetings. Lachey again. No, Carrie Bay, that was Grand Rising. Then Macadam 1, Danny Caramel, Peace. Who else we got? Copper Pride, Peace, Grand Afternoon. Mike Easton, what's going on the Twitch? Big Nelsa, Peace. Who we got? Wild Indian Roots is here. P. Parker here. Somebody. I know I saw some new names. Kennard Burnett. Grand afternoon. Peace. Where we at? Scrolling. Thumb scrolling. One Dream 33 on the Twitch. Peace. Peace. I'm going on mute. Questions, comments, concerns, and corrections, please email us at attentionassembly@gmail.com.
Okay, can you hear me?
Nope.
Huh?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Huh?
How you gonna ask if we can hear you and you won't read it?
I'm just saying, no, that huh, there's too much going on.
Oh. Mm-hmm. You need me to read?
Okay.
Where we at?
The Merriam Report. The Merriam Report. Charges of inefficiency and corruption within the Office of Indian Affairs led to various fact-finding studies in the 1920s. The leading critic was John Collier. In addition to corruption, he questioned whether education should stress manual labor skills, farming, and domestic labor set in an atmosphere of military discipline and English-only instruction. The most substantial study came in 1926 and 1927 and was known as the Survey of Indian Affairs. The Commission of Indian Affairs Indian Affairs requested the Institute for Government Research, IGR, to conduct the study. Lewis Merriam, who was on the IGR staff, led the study team. Another major figure of the team was Henry Rowe Cloud, a Winnebago Indian educator who helped with tribal contacts. Funded by John D. Rockefeller Jr. and promoted by the Brookings Institution of Washington, D.C., the team engaged in fact-finding and crafting of recommendations. The study focused on how social services provided to Indians compared to similar services by the federal government provided for the general public. The resulting 872-page report, titled The Problem of Indian Administration, 1928, identified the sorry state of affairs for American Indians. The investigators found widespread poverty, shockingly high disease rates, poor diets, short life expectancy, low levels of education achievement, despair, and loss of resources. At that time of the Merriam Report, 55% of American Indians had an annual income of less than $200 per year. Only 2% had incomes greater than $500 per year, and the remainder had incomes in between. After its team leader tied many of the deployable problems to the loss of lands through federal policies since the 1880s. It made a strong case for major changes in the administration of affairs relating to American Indians. Importantly, the report recommended that the federal government permit American Indians who choose to live by Indian culture traditions to do so. Importantly, the report recommended that the federal government permit American Indians who choose to live by Indian culture traditions to do so. The report also concluded that Indian schools largely lack the resources needed to properly educate Indian children. This study became a blueprint for the New Dealers who wanted to change federal policy and programs in the 1930s. We're not even at the 1970s yet.
But y'all know what's funny? When you read this, then you read the stories on so-called Black education. You know the information and the numbers are the same. They just
Uh-huh.
changed the name of how they identifying these people.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you
Because
know the school system, the same problem with blacks in schools is going on at the same time this is.
yep.
1920. Public education.
Yep.
Same people, depending on who's telling the story, they got different titles.
Right. Perspectives, the public. The 1930s was a period of changing public perceptions of Indian peoples. Indians began finding some opportunities to present their own interest in defining and implementing New Deal programs rather than having white supporters speaking solely for them. Several major images of American Indians in the 1930s had been carried over from earlier times. These images dominated thought and debate over what should be done about the plight of the Indians. A prevailing image of Indians held by the reformers in the 1930s who had moved away from assimilation to multiculturalism goals was that of the good Indian or noble savage. An image held by those who still promoted assimilation was one of the bad or degraded Indian. A third image, common throughout the spectrum, was that of Indians as relics of the past, an exotic dimension of human life found in the United States. Okay. The noble savage perspective was a romantic notion of American Indians. The extension of the railroad into American Southwest by the late 19th century opened up the world of the Indian Pueblo culture to white tourists and U.S. society in general. In addition, more settlers poured into the Southwest, increasing interaction with the Pueblo communities. This increased exposure caused a romantic notion of native culture to grow among many. John Collier, a social reformer from New York City, was one of those. I thought he was from Georgia. Was one of those who visited the Pueblo area in 1920. He was immediately taken with the seemingly exotic culture. Collier became the leading promoter of reform in the U.S. Indian policy. This romantic viewpoint was also adapted by many Americans who had become disillusioned with the growing mass production and mass consumerism of American society and the increasingly crowded urban conditions. To them, Indians seemed to have a superior spiritual life compared to whites. They lived a life of serenity in contrast to the increasing pace of the industrialized world. Puebloan artistic skills were similarly higher revered. Using this idealism perspective of Indian culture, reformers believed the native traditions should be preserved and honored for their values towards community and the land. These same supporters who romanticized over Indian culture, however, still doubted Indian intellect. Just as promoters of assimilation spoke on behalf of Indian peoples that integration into mainstream society would be best for Indians, promoters of multiculturalism who opposed assimilation also believed that they could best express what was best in preserving Indian culture. Neither side seemed interested in having Indians speak for themselves. Another common public perspective was that of the degraded Indian. The degraded Indian, it was believed, was a result of his own natural laziness and dishonesty and drunkenness. Um, Stereotypes, okay.
Yeah, stereotypes
Stereotypes,
and Uncle Savage and all this stuff. Yeah, they created the image of what they wanted the public to view the Indian as. And we should know how
right,
this worked because they did it this again when they wanted the public to view the misidentified African American as whatever they wanted you to be at the time.
right.
Super predator, thug, drug dealer. We seen it our whole life, y'all.
So in a
We just
way,
now seeing
we've
how
taken
all this goes back.
right.
Oh, go ahead, Gabby.
You
I'm
know,
sorry.
no. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry, handsome. I'm sorry. Um, so in a way, we have, and I'm saying we as a blanket, we have taken those stereotypes and used, and those stereotypes have been what we use to divide. So like
Yeah,
the stereotype of the lazy Indian, the stereotype of the religious
it's the
Indian,
lazy
the
Negro.
right,
Think about it. Is the lazy Negro, the super spiritual
correct,
Negro. Come on, we're the
right.
same people. And if you understand how they identify them, and you realize the way that the Indian is talked about is the same way where the misrepresented African American is represented the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. Indians were considered Negroes. We're considered Negroes. You notice everybody else got their own cultural nickname, but the Indian and the so-called African American shares the same one.
Right.
We share the same descriptive terms because we're the same people.
Right.
Because we know this for a fact. Ain't no African Americans existing in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. You didn't hear the term until 89, and you couldn't be an African American until the 2000s. First time it was ever on the census is the year 2000.
Where they at,
So
though?
from here all the way up to 2000, African American don't exist. It wasn't created. But
Oh
if you
my
pay
goodness.
attention, you can see the shift in the 40s and 50s to start creating the image of the African American.
But not just that. This is a continuous pattern. So would it be correct
Yes.
in my thinking and relating it to the assimilated Indian, the assimilated under a Christianized
Yes.
assimilation to
Yes.
Africa?
Listen, don't even look at it as assimilating you to sending you to Africa.
No. Go ahead.
To get you to assimilation, all they did was this. They realized that they couldn't get Indians to break away from the tribes like that. We read that earlier.
Right.
That even when they said Indians were still practicing their tribal ways. So what did they do? They started creating categories and start relabeling Indians.
Right.
And then started, remember what we learned about the dance and the culture. That's not real Indian dance and culture. They created that and retaught that to a whole new set of children. Now, once you teach these children and these children have children, what do they teach their children? That's why you see tribes that's doing cultural practices that weren't around back then.
Right.
You know, like stiff dances.
Yeah.
Are we still reading from the same same? Okay.
And the reason why I said it's a lot of our actual cultural stuff, they perverted it.
Right.
So they gave us a new culture. To the point they did it so much, they created the African American and converted the Indian to that.
Yeah.
Think about it. We're in the same schools, in the same areas. You should be seeing two different people that share these traits amongst each other. If their story is what they're trying to tell you about the African and Indian is true, then you should find a culture that's bridged between African and Indian culture. You don't. Because what the African American do has nothing to do with Africa. Ain't none of that cultural to Africa. That's all American. And can somebody please tell me how grandma know how to make cornbread, grits, and all this other corn products from scratch? Just a thought.
Yeah, they make all of this stuff from scratch. The same with sweet potatoes. My great grandmother taught me how to bake sweet potato pie from scratch. She taught me how to sew moccasins together. from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
She showed me all of these things. She showed me how to knit beadwork. If you go look at the Tuscarora Nation up in New York, you'll see that all with their arts and crafts, they have all this elaborate beadwork. She was doing that on her own 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Think about it. Our grandparents didn't go to no sewing classes. My mom didn't go to no sewing classes, and all of them knew how to sew clothes from scratch. Forget a pattern, they made their own patterns. I used to have homeboys be like, "Where you get that shirt from?" This exclusive. My mama sold this.
On my mama, on my hood. No, I'm just kidding.
No, real talk. My mother and them used to make us polo shirts and all that.
Man, look, when I was in high school, that's how I made my money. People would pick outfits out of the magazine. I get the material. Okay.
Yeah, because you got to think the 70s and all that, it wasn't about running to them stores buying that stuff. We were still manufacturing a lot of our stuff still.
Mm-hmm.
Hey there, Coffee India. How was going today?
We started. Peace, Bone. Hey, everybody. I'm real late.
No problem.
You're breaking up, man.
Yeah, I'm going on Wi-Fi, so I might actually drop off at this point. But just real quick, did y'all notice that once we stopped making our own clothes, what did we get? Kente cloth.
Yep.
We started getting these African fashions and stuff.
And dashikis.
And dashikis and all that other stuff. Once we stopped making our own clothes.
Got cross colors.
He was like, hey, y'all should celebrate Kwanzaa.
Mm-hmm.
You ain't notice, and he hit it right on the head. As soon as we stopped making it, all the fashion that was marketed to us through the 80s and 90s, it was all in African colors. Listen, it got so bad. I remember the X-Men shoes. The Tim Hardaway with the X on it, they had the inside and out. The Jordan Bugs Bunny had African colors on the bottom and then the inside. Think about it. They ran a number on us through the 80s and 90s.
They did that with lottos too. Remember they had the Velcro? You could take out the...
Look at all the stuff we had.
Mm-hmm.
We went from wearing comfortable clothes to super baggy clothes. You wear super baggy clothes over there in Africa in the desert because it's super hot. Oh yeah, we've been bamboozled, y'all.
And see, like wearing baggy clothes meant that you were a bum. And then that became a fashion. That became a thing.
That's here. But now look culturally. If you live in Africa, you're gonna wear loose, baggy clothes because the heat. It's cooler the baggier the clothes in the heat. You don't want clothes-fitting clothes in the heat. You're gonna burn up.
Right.
And you're not walking around in no wife beater, no tank top in Africa. They chicken for real. They be like, why your arms 10 shades darker than your chest? Man, I wore a t-shirt. Yeah, for people who don't know, if you ever travel to parts like that, you are more cooler in long sleeve baggy clothes. It might sound crazy, but in the hottest temperature sun, you are cooler in baggy, loose clothes. You notice all them people in the desert, what they wearing? Loose, baggy clothes. Ain't nobody walking around no desert, no t-shirt and shorts.
Hey, man. Copperback, he could tell you.
Yeah, that's a fact. I mean, you look at, and all throughout time, if you look at the dress of people that were in that part of the world, all of that stuff was loose. All of it was so that air could get in and get through your clothes. Well, all of a sudden, roots come out, and they got everybody wanting to wear dashikis and kente cloth and all this other stuff. All this stuff that was pitched to us as African stuff.
All right.
By who? By our college professors, by some of our leaders. by some of these organizations that came in selling us this whole idea of Pan-Africanism.
Mm-hmm. Given to us hook, line, and sinker. And if you look how they did it, they programmed us with the music and images, then they gave us a culture. No, name one of us knew nothing about Africa, just the name. Couldn't even find it on the map at the time.
Oh, give me 2 minutes. I'll be right back. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. To the point they try to tell us that we them, but it's kind of funny. They starting to copy us now.
Yeah, I mean, look at the music scene. Look at the movie scene. Look at, because I was talking to my wife about Nollywood because she's gotten into, watching those movies. And I said, well, I said, no offense or nothing, but why do all of these movies seem to pretty much be the same, whether they're comedy or drama or whatever? It's pretty much a household or a couple of households. There's some issues with relationships. There's issues with like somebody's flaking out in the marriage or something like that. I said, this is pretty much all the same story. She's like, what do you mean? I said, how many have you watched in the last couple of weeks? They're pretty much the same story. But if you look at quote unquote black cinema, what are we talking about? Relationships, households.
Same movies for the last 20 years, just different actors and actors. Some of them are the same.
It's the same thing. Right. And then every once in a while, they recruit people from here to go there to be in their movies as the American that immigrated back to Africa, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Crazy. And that's just like when I was looking up when we came across, hold on, let me pull up on my side, the General Federation of Women's Clubs. And I was looking it up, and I was like, yeah, we're going to end up down the line, we're going to cover this. Because it's kind of funny that the General Federation of Women's Clubs is what led to the feminist movement. You know, that same one that came in and now got that fist up in the air representing the women's movement? Yeah, them folks. So now you have to ask yourself, why were they financing Collier to speak for Indians? Because the General Federation of Women's Clubs took the process of, they were the mothers of the nation and the teachers. They were teaching Indian children. That was their benefit from it. And not to mention, some of these women supported the American Colonization Society.
There's a whole lot of instances where you start seeing things that are concerning Indians end up overlapping with black folks and Negroes, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Creating laws and stuff for people. Recreating cultural dances and practices and teaching it to a new generation of children. And like I said before, once you teach these children these new created ways and they become adults, they're more likely to teach it to their children. They're more receptive to letting their children go to these schools and programs to learn this falsified culture, because to them, they don't know no different. They were kidnapped as children and that's all they know. I mean, no different than us, no different than the urban Indian, prisoners of war who have been stripped of our culture and history. And some of us have no idea. So it's a lot more easier to call you an African American and point you in the wrong direction because you have no idea of who you truly are.
Exactly. And they already knew that play worked in the playbook, so they play it every time.
Yep. I mean, I remember earlier somebody said the rabbit hole is deep. I think we done bought an excavator in and made a ditch.
No, we got underground bunkers coming out of this one. What you talking about? We got dumbs.
Yeah, I mean, if you study Disney, you understand how they attack you. They don't care about the grown-ups like that. It's the children. Because if you can program a child, program their mind to think how you want them to think, you have less of a problem when they're an adult. To the point, we see what happens. They can back away, and these children, they start doing it to themselves. Ain't we killing ourselves left and right? Ain't we pulling ourselves down like crabs in a bucket? Think about it. Taught to hate each other. We were taught to hate each other. And still can't get over the fact that Oklahoma tribes willingly chose to assimilate into white culture. And that's something that we've been touching on before, to where we say a lot of these Indians didn't do it by force. Some of them wanted to. Ran with open arms like, hey there. I just looked at the time I looked at it. I mean, if there's nothing else to add on to it, we can go ahead and pause it here for the day, and we can pick it back up when we go back live again. Because there's a lot more to cover on this.
I'm back. What I missed? I'm sorry.
No, just saying, since there's so much more to cover on it, we can pause it for the day and pick it back up when we go live again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's probably like another hour or two worth of reading. There's a whole lot more information. So any closing thoughts or salutations? Since it's that time, almost 1 p.m. on this beautiful Friday.
I'll be quick. Salivations. Continue on your genealogical journey. Genealogy is important. Genealogy is key. Know who you are so that no one can tell you who you are. Pass that along to your children. Pass it along to your family, your friends, your neighbors. Pass that information along so they can know who they are, so that no one can tell them who they are. Anyone telling you that genealogy is not important and is not key is really setting you up for them to tell you who you are.
Follow what they is, an Indian agent. I ain't pulling no punches.
Nah. Shout out to you, Bones. Shout out to A2. They would have got away with it too. Yeah. Anybody telling you not to do genealogy is important. It doesn't matter. I have a real expanded understanding of what an Indian agent is. I learn something new every day, and today, things just gotta, again, a little bit more deeper and a little bit more serious and a little bit heavier. So, anyone telling you not to do your genealogy doesn't matter. They're taking you away from your culture. They're taking you away from your family. They're taking you away from your heritage. They're taking you away from who you are, so they can replace it with who they tell you you are. Do your genealogy. Know who you are so that no one can tell you who you are. And again, pass that along to your children, family, friends, neighbors, so they can know who they are, so that no one can tell them who they are. I mean, doing your genealogy, you might find out where you've been living this whole time. That's a whole tribe. Been there right in front of your face. Whole time. Just saying. Do the census. Make yourself count so that you can count. April 1st was Census Day, but again, it has been extended out to October 31st. That is the decennial census. Along with the decennial census, you have the ACS census that is still happening every month, every year, along with the decennial census. And in 2022, the agriculture 5-year census will be up. Again, do the census. Make yourself count so that you can count. Because if you don't count yourself, somebody else will count you. Period. If you don't put your voice in pen on paper or on a link and type online, do the census, somebody else will. Make yourself count so that you can count. That is one of many ways that we get our voice out there. Again, get out there, participate, get in the knowing. We pull ancestry records through census records. Who's going to be looking for you 150 years from now? All this ties in together. All of it ties in together. With that being said, peace to the panel, peace to the chat, peace to the silent majority. Shout out to you, double cousin, as always, for your wise words.
Hi.
The ground on which we stand is sacred ground. It is the blood of our ancestors. Peace to the panel, peace to the chat, peace to the silent majority.
All right.
You got that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Grand afternoon to everybody in the chat. Matter of fact, let me see if it's another roll call is necessary. I'll start from the bottom up. Nope. We good. Danny Caramel, got everybody. Well, peace to the chats, plural, Twitch included, website, YouTube, silent majority, peace to y'all, listening now or listening later. Questions, comments, concerns, and or corrections, the email address has not changed. attentionassembly@gmail.com. The call-in number is on the screen. I'm going to be posting it in the chat, as well as the Zoom link. We are here all the time. We are always saying that. Believe it. And yeah, I guess we will see y'all when you click the link or dial in or the next live stream. Bones, you talking about today, ain't you? I know you talking about today. All right, y'all. Peace, y'all. Peace of Doo-Doo Vision, Carrie Bay, Copper Indio, A2,
Carrie, cover.
And the folks that don't know that they A2, y'all A2.
Shout out to A2.
All right. What you got for him, Brother Copper?
All right. Well, it is Friday, and it's a very beautiful day, at least here in Virginia. Hopefully, it's pretty nice where you are as well, and hopefully you all are safe and healthy, and in good health, that is. I wanted to expand on something just real quick that Brother Bones was saying about how some of our tribes, some of our people, willfully went into what we now call white culture. And this goes back to what we were saying at the end of yesterday's program about race and how it doesn't take but one or two generations for somebody's whole concept of race to change, for a family's whole concept of race to change. We see a lot of images and scenarios with mixed race couples in media. I'm not here to tell anybody who they should or should not be with. That is not my place. That is the business of the people involved. However, when you see that, you're seeing the same thing that's been going on since before people came here in mass. And that is not going to stop. However much some people might want it to stop, however much people may see it as a watering down of their culture and their genetics, it is not going to stop. And we have to understand race for what it is. It is a tool used to govern people. And some people said, hey, we got an advantage by being this. So even though we'll call ourselves Indians or Native Americans or whatever have you, we want to go into the culture of people who came here, people who set up shop here and started their own government laid on top of ours. That is their choice. However, as said yesterday and today, the purpose of what we're talking about is to make amends and make peace with what has happened and move forward into the future. So it is on you now, all of you, panel, the people in the chat, solid majority, everybody. Even people who don't necessarily agree with us. It is up to everybody, everyone, to make amends with what has happened, to make peace with what has happened and move forward. But we had to do so understanding that we cannot look at race as phenotype purely, because there's not a person around you that is purely one quote-unquote race. Those are identifiers. Those are descriptive terms. And the way you look right now, if your children had children with other peoples, and it had gone on for enough time, for enough generations, your bloodline would look like a completely different group of people.
Facts.
Just remember that. Just keep that in mind. And I mentioned this yesterday on the program as well, but even the people who came here in search for a better life and were given a bribe to go and fill up the numbers on some of these roles for the Dawes Commission were swindled and tricked as well.
That part.
These people were not necessarily treated better than any of us. They were just trying to find a way for themselves, thought they found it, and ended up realizing they got fooled. Didn't it the same thing that happened to us? Some of us decided, we were going to go and be like the people who we saw had power and ended up getting swindled as well. Yep. We all got tricked.
To add on to what Copper said real quick, that we forget when we read history. The Dawes Act happened before they stripped the tribes. So all these $5 Indians, what happened to a lot of them?
Right.
Were reduced to poor folks.
Yep.
Same as us.
Yep.
Read the history. Do not let nobody fool you. A lot of people got damaged behind this. A lot of people.
Right.
And when you start reading true history, you'll realize that this game just wasn't to affect the American Indian. They had to lie to everyone to pull this off, even their own people.
Exactly. And that's where we're leading. The end game affects all of us. Doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter whether you declare yourself to be an Indian or an Aborigine or an autochthon. It does not matter what you call yourself. Because remember, as far as government was concerned, we're all citizens. Doesn't matter if you claim to be an Indian. And this is what we're showing you. With these laws that were passed and these court decisions, this is what was decided long before most of us were born. And so we can argue all day about what our status is or what our status needs to be, but in the end, they're going to treat you the same. And if you really think that with the stuff that's coming, they're going to treat you or I any different because we claim to be in some other status, we're sorely mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I bid you all a good day. Hopefully I get to talk to some of you later as you may jump into the meeting or on the call or whatever have you later on. But peace to everyone. Good health and good day. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you again, Gabrielle. No sellout and call for Indio, the active chat, and the solid majority. And just to add on what everyone said before and to keep it brief, is that we have an opportunity here. We have an opportunity to fix our conditions, to no longer complain and point fingers, but to actually do something, to build and develop the institutions that we need to be successful. Because if we sit back and we keep letting it go on the same way and expecting for it to change, then we are some insane American Indians. Because history showed you that every time that we sat back and let someone else did it, we got stripped further and further and further and further away from who we are. So if that's not the siren ringing off in your head, telling you, wake up, take your rightful position, be responsible, and let's link up and put our communities back together, then I guess it wasn't meant for you to hear. But those of you who do, continue to work. Continue linking up with like-minded individuals. Continue to see what you can do today to make your community better for tomorrow. And also, the line will be open after the show. Tomorrow it'll be the meeting that we have every Saturday. And remember, tomorrow it will be official, the starting of an American Indian Genealogy Society, our own. So the days of complaining about records, we can finally do something about it. Now all it takes is our participation. Your first nonprofit is here. Your second, third, and fourth is right around the corner. What are we gonna do? So until we link up to the next Rising Show, remember we love you and peace.
Peace, everybody.
Peace, y'all.
Peace, y'all. See y'all later.
Oh, seems like it's getting hot in here, y'all. Oh, look, they just don't got one nonprofit. They got two real companies, and the third one coming behind it. Somebody stop them.
Now, what happened?
I don't know. I guess all this unreal work turns out to be real. These programs work.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
It's real.
And you know what? Thank you, Bones, because I realized I could get that LLC established, and I don't have to do anything with it right now, but put everything in place.
Exactly.
Yeah, we better get you one of these.
And for all these people that keep trying to throw shots over here saying outwork us, I advise y'all look at the scoreboard.
Nah, it's double cousin that work us. Stay up to 12:01.
Is we live?
Yeah, we still live. You know I can't let it go off like that. I got to say something.
Y'all could have let me know. I'm just saying. I was about to cuss, and I said peace, y'all. And
yeah, I was about to go in. Double cousin. Double cousin work us.
Oh, the meeting tomorrow is at 1 p.m. The meeting is at 1 p.m. every Saturday, and it's the same call-in number Zoom link that we use for everything else. It's the community Zoom link, the community number.
Nobody hiding.
If you want to conversate and you got some things you need help with, you can contact us time you see the credits rolling. We're here, and we'll probably be here at 3:30 in the morning, all rising.
Full stomachs is coming from a front yard near you.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. If you email us, we'll look over it. That's no problem. And again, before we get out of here, for all those who keep saying outworkers, again, look at the scoreboard. For only a year and 2 months in.
You said outwork us. I thought you were saying Bones works us. Oh, okay.
Look, how about this? Bones is doing a reverse.
Movie. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I was like, double cousin work us. Stay up till 12:01.
Look, hey now. Just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, 2 months and over 400 in self-help programs we done did live streams on. Yeah, I think they need to check the scoreboard for real.
Trying to tell you.
You're doing a reverse hit dogs holler.
Yeah, on reverse because ain't nobody gonna call in and address it. So
I know, right?
We gotta
reverse psychology.
I gotta play the side.
That's A2.
Other guy.
A2 don't get tired.
Don't challenge him. All right.
Please do. We waiting.
Look at your friends around you.
Are they sitting in a room by themselves?
Playing on the background.
Can I be heard? No, we don't want to hear you.
Do a double cousin. Nope.
And I guess we out of here now. Until later. And again, anyone got any questions, any help, or just want to kick it with your American brothers and sisters? Line is open now. Peace.
Man, it stay open.
Oh, just seeing the chat real quick. Happy birthday to Randy James. Happy Earth Day to Randy James.
Happy Earth Day to Randy James.
Warning, warning, warning. Hard hats, pickaxe, shovels, boots required.